today comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 24 through 30, and 36 through 43. Listen now for the word of God. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like someone who planted good seed in his field. While people were sleeping, an enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat and went away. When the stalks sprouted and bore grain, then the weeds also appeared. The servants of the landowner came and said to him, "Master, didn't you plant good seed in your field? Then how is it that it has weeds?" "An enemy has done this," he answered. The servants said to him, "Do you want us to go and gather them?" But the landowner said, "No, because if you gather the weeds, you'll pull up the wheat along with them. Let both grow side by side until the harvest. And at harvest time, I'll say to the harvesters, first, gather the weeds and tie them together in bundles to be burned, but bring the wheat into my barn." Jesus left the crowds and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." Jesus replied, "The one who plants the good seed is the human one. The field is the word. And the good seeds are the followers of the kingdom. But the weeds are the followers of the evil one. The enemy who planted them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the present age. The harvesters are the angels. Just as people gather weeds and burn them in the fire, so it will be at the end of the present age. The human one will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that cause people to fall away and all people who sin. He will throw them into a burning furnace. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in their Father's kingdom. Those who have ears should hear. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What is a good plant and what is a weed? Dandelions are a common weed, but they are also edible and medicinal. Flowers like Queen Anne's lace, people have sometimes thought that they were weeds and treated them as such, but some people also plant them on purpose. Things like clover, you could perceive as a weed if it's not right where you want it, but its flowers are good for the bees and it is useful ground cover. Weeds are sometimes about perspective. A group of youth went to work at a community garden once, and they were told by the leader who was there to pick some plants to weed, and she pointed out to them which plants she wanted picked as the weeds and which plants should stay. Now they worked for an hour diligently, and then another leader came, and this leader said, "Oh, no, you've been picking the flowers and leaving the weeds." So she told them to do the opposite of what the first leader had said. And then another hour went by and the first leader came back again and said, oh, no, you've been doing the wrong thing. Sometimes weeds are about perspective and what you want where. And there's something about recognition and knowing which plants should stay and which should go, and what the goal of your garden is. I have been a gardener before, and I've got 2 little veggie boxes right now that I'm not so diligent about tending. But in seminary, I got really excited about gardening and revived our campus's community garden. Several times it went, right around this time or in August when it was just so hot, or we had gone on vacation, I would come back and the weeds would have just taken over. There's something too to be said about knowing what different plants are and which plants can deal with a few weeds, which plants are strong enough to do so, and which plants need to be kept free of weeds. You can't sow seeds in a field of weeds because they need a good foundation. And those weeds are wild. Here in Kentucky, there was all kinds of crabgrass. That was the main problem we had, which was quite the nuisance in that garden. So I'm used to thinking about pulling up weeds in gardens because the goal there is to let your plants grow. Some weeds like clover are not super aggressive and you can keep them. But in this story, this parable for the week, the parable of the weeds and the wheat, or the wheat and the tares, T-A-R-E-S, if you're familiar with the King James version of this parable. In this story, Jesus has some unconventional, maybe, farming advice. The story goes that there's a farmer who sows the seed, and then in the night, the enemy comes and plants weed seeds. I'm not quite sure where you would get these weed seeds or why you would have saved them on purpose, but so the story goes, the weed seeds were planted alongside the wheat, and so they came up together. And when the servants saw this, they said, "Oh no, didn't you plant good seed? We must remedy this immediately." They didn't say that exactly, but they said, "Let's go. Do you want us to tear it all up?" And the master said, "No. If you do that, if you tromp around in the field, you will pull up both the wheat and the weeds." Now, I never had thought about it like that before, but I heard from a pastor farmer who explained that wheat is different than other crops that I'm more familiar with, mainly being veggies like tomatoes and peppers and green beans and the like. Wheat, I don't think I've ever even seen a field of wheat. Having grown up in the South, there's cornfields everywhere. Nowadays, there's soybean fields everywhere. I know what a cotton field looks like from growing up in Tennessee. But wheat is more like a grass. It is a grass. And so managing a wheat field is like managing a prairie. So this other pastor said wheat, what you do is you prepare the soil really well beforehand. But then it is, in fact, as the parable says, as Jesus says, you let it go and then sort it out at the end. Wheat is more fragile than other plants. It can, because it is a grass, be pulled up really easily, and you can damage it if you're tromping around in the field with it. Interestingly, too, I learned that the weed that Jesus is talking about in this parable was something called darnel, Lolium temulentum being the, I guess, Latin species name of it, tares, as I said, from the King James Version, and it looks a lot like wheat. I should have pulled a picture up. Maybe I'll share one with you guys later, but they are pretty indistinguishable. Now, the thing about this weed, this darnel, it really is a weed that serves no other purpose. Perhaps it does for the ecology, but for humans, it is definitely a weed because it is poisonous. It has these little black seeds. And if there's too many seeds that get in the bread, you can go blind or worse die. So I wish I had some sort of book about farming in the ancient world, because I'm kind of interested in it, but what the normal practice would have been to deal with these weeds. But again, I go back to the weed and the wheat look a whole lot alike. And Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who plants the good seed. The enemy comes and sows the bad seed. And then the farmer says, let them grow together. We'll sort it out in the end. And in that second part of the passage that we heard earlier, you hear Jesus talking not to the crowds where he was telling the parable, but talking just to his disciples, where he's explaining out piece by piece this parable in allegorical terms. You know, he says, the wheat is this, those who follow me. The sower is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and so on and so forth. And so how are we, what are we to make of this parable? And what does it say for us today? Well, I think we are often like those servants who want to sort out things. We trust in our ability to determine what is a weed and what is wheat, even though they may look a lot alike. And we're really anxious and impatient to go and take care of things that we deem are weeds. We want to go and pull things up, no matter what may happen. We are afraid, maybe, that the wheat won't survive. We have good intentions, maybe, but we're often a little anxious, and we want to see things in black and white. We think we can manage the field ourselves and judge the world accurately. From the time that we are children, we are ingrained with all these really subconscious rules about the world. We have rubrics about who is good, who is bad, what behaviors are acceptable. We think we know what the purpose of our lives is and what other people should be doing with their lives. We screen things through our own lenses that we're often not even aware of. We want to judge, we want to fix. But this parable reminds us of the humbling good news, which is that we're not the farmer in this parable. God is the farmer. We're not the ones to be running around fixing things or doing the weeding, because God is the farmer. God is the farmer who knows and loves the crops, who knows and loves the world. We are not God. We are human. We have our own place in God's reign, but it is not to be in control. The farmer knows and loves the fields. So, how are we to live then? Knowing that we are not accurate judges, that it is up to God to judge. God says, let them grow together. And as plants, maybe that's what we are to do, to grow and to be, to trust the farmer who is not us. I think of really the field of wildflowers at church. They exist on their own. They grow together. Now, we're not trying to harvest them, but God's world maybe is something like that. In an ecological system like a field of wildflowers, everything hangs together. And there maybe are things that are poisonous to us or to other creatures, but we avoid eating them. And God, in the end, will sort it all out. If we're worried about getting rid of the weeds, we can trust that God provides. We do not need to judge, and that is a relief on our part. We can simply look for the wheat in the world. So friends, let us trust the farmer. Let us grow together. Let us be wheat. Let us sink into openness and welcome all. Because while there are weeds in this world, there's also probably more wheat in more places and people than we have been taught to see. And we have a hard time seeing. But God is the farmer. God sows good seed. And that seed is abundant and will grow no matter what. Thanks be to God.